welcome everyone. I'm Vanessa Cornett and I'm here with my colleague Erica Scheurer, and we're excited to talk to you about a program that we began at the University of St. Thomas called One University, One Breath, Changemaking through Mindfulness. And to begin, we would actually like to invite you, if you like, to experience a single moment of mindful awareness, which can be more effective than a lengthy seated meditation. So I invite you to become fully aware of the present moment right now. Inhale deeply with pure objective awareness and exhale completely, knowing that you are fully present right here, right now. And that is what we call one conscious breath, which is basically the foundation for how Erica and I have worked to introduce mindfulness to a diverse group of people at the very ground level.
One University, One Breath at St. Thomas has been definitely a collaboration of a number of different units on campus. We have the Project for Mindfulness and Contemplation, which is a group of faculty and staff and some students who for a few years before this even started was working on building up mindfulness and contemplation across campus. We have our Center for Wellbeing, which is new, but the Wellness Center, which is now part of that, was one of the big supporters in the early days. We have the Center for the Common Good, which houses Ashoka Changemaker, and also now One University, One Breath. And they've been supporting our most recent efforts. And the Office for Spirituality, St. Thomas is a Catholic university, and so the contemplation side is also supported. And finally, the Center for Faculty Development, which has supported lots of workshops and faculty learning communities, and also outside learning for me specifically. So it's been very much a team effort. So I'm going to tell you the backstory of One University, One Breath. I was in a faculty learning community with Vanessa. She was leading that in 2016. And she told us a story about Eckhart Tolle, who is one of the big leaders in the mindfulness movement. He was on a radio show and someone called in who said, I'm practicing this and I'm spending so many minutes doing that and going through various mindfulness techniques and how much time she spent on each, I guess. Correct me if I'm wrong, Vanessa. And it went on for a while, apparently. And then Eckhart Tolle paused and said, in response to her question of how much time, one conscious breath in and out is a meditation. One conscious breath. So that evening, when I was walking my dog through campus, which I do every evening, I was noticing the banners that we have. If you were here at St. Thomas, you would see such banners that say One University. And I thought, well, One University, One Breath. How would it change the culture of St. Thomas if everyone on campus took one conscious breath a day? Just one. How would that change our campus? So that's the story.
And we're sticking to it, right? So, there is a lot of research out there on mindfulness and the benefits of mindfulness. And if you're interested in looking at that literature, most of those studies have to do specifically with the practice of meditation. And I think that's probably because it is easier to measure the practice of meditation than it is to measure in a research setting mindfulness. How do you measure human consciousness? But we did dig into that research, which goes back in the US mostly to the 1970s is where the boom in these studies started. And that's basically thanks to John Kabat-Zinn and his work at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center. So we have from the 1970s till today, I can't keep up with the research on mindfulness and the benefits of mindfulness, but we've sort of on this slide sort of summarized some of the benefits for you. The early research focused on physical health benefits. How can meditation be a part of physical healing? If you look at the research now, the vast majority of research is on mental health and mental well-being, which is so important, especially right now. So when you look at all of the possible benefits of mindfulness and combine the physical with the mental, this is exactly what we need when we talk about holistic teaching or whole student learning. So there are a number of sort of meta studies that will sort of summarize that research for you.
This is the mission of the Association for Contemplative Mind in Higher Education, which is an organization that we link to in our handouts. It's really useful for just the promotion of learning about contemplative practices in the higher education context. And what they do is connect contemplative practices with social justice and just change making in the world, what we would call at this conference. They make that connection because so many people see them as separate, right? That there's the meditators and the mindfulness people, and there's the people who are making change in the world. And the Association for Contemplative Mind in Higher Ed has seen the connection between the two for a long time, and their programming, we highly recommend. They have in-person programming, but they also have free webinars. So we highly recommend that you look at that.
So Erica and I wanted to model a couple of the practices that we use in the classroom and in the greater university setting. So during this session, we're going to lead you in two short guided meditation practices. This first one early on, it's going to be a 5-minute practice on sensory awareness, present moment awareness. The two practices we're going to lead for you are secular and inclusive practices, and they're grounded in best practices in trauma-sensitive mindfulness. So to that end, I just want to make the case that these are all invitations. You are not required to do anything. You're not required to close your eyes. I've given you a framework of 5 minutes, and I'm actually going to start my stopwatch for you. And also, at the end of the 5 minutes, I'm going to ring this bell, which I like to ring beforehand so it won't startle you. But that's how this meditation will end. So if you would like to participate right now for just 5 minutes, I invite you to turn off your camera if you like. Nobody is watching you, but if you feel more comfortable meditating, thinking that perhaps no one can see the camera, you're certainly welcome to do that. I invite you to give yourself permission to set aside all of the tasks on your to-do list, all of your worries, all of the other things tugging at your attention. You may close your eyes if you wish, or you may direct your gaze downward while you direct all of your energy and awareness to caring for yourself right now in this moment. Allow yourself to settle into a comfortable position, however you may be sitting. And if you like, you may gently begin to focus your attention on the breath. There is no need to control the breath. Simply observe the natural inhale and the exhale, the soft rise and fall of the abdomen. If you direct your attention to your current surroundings, you may become gently aware of those things around you that you can feel or hear. What does your physical body feel like right now as you sit in this space? Are you able to notice the physical body in space objectively with little or no assessment or judgment? And if not, can you accept that as well? You may choose to regard the physical self as it is, or you may wish to scan the body for any excess tension and relax those spots if you want to. For example, you may wish to relax what I like to call Zoom face, because no one is watching you right now, so there's no need to smile or look engaged or even interested. You might allow your face and your brow to completely release, or allow the jaw to become loose and heavy. Allow the lips to separate, and as the jaw relaxes, you may feel the resulting space created between the teeth. What else do you feel? What does your seat feel like supporting your body? What sounds can you hear right now beyond the sound of my voice? What else can you notice right now? The mind will probably wander and drift. This is natural and to be expected. We can continue to return to this present moment again and again. This is the present moment. This is the only moment we will ever have. And I invite you to come back. You may leave your camera off or turn it back on if you wish. That was one example of a 5-minute mindfulness meditation. Sometimes 5 minutes seems like a long time, and sometimes the time just flies. Erica mentioned the Association for Contemplative Mind in Higher Education. This is an organization that she and I have been really involved with. I'm just so impressed with this organization. And for those of you who have any interest in mindfulness practices in higher ed, I certainly encourage you to check out their website. This tree, if you can see it well on your device, is the Tree of Contemplative Practices, which is sort of designed by this association. And it's basically a visual representation of the broad practices related to contemplative education. And I'm showing you this tree because we just practiced a 5-minute meditation, but if you look to the lower left of the tree, the branch of stillness, and then you'll see out of the branch of stillness, you've got sort of the stillness meditations, quieting the mind, silence, centering. And I just want to make the point that this is one tiny, tiny part of the tree of broader contemplative practices. On the slide here, we've put sort of the main categories of contemplative practices as outlined by this organization. And if you look closely, you can see that yes, we could have done a 5-minute stillness meditation, which we did, but we also could have spent 5 minutes in movement, walking, perhaps walking a labyrinth, doing some kind of yoga or movement or martial arts in that mindful way. Or we could have done something creative like art or improvisation or journaling. You'll notice at the very top of the tree is the activist branch, which we're going to talk about a little later. I like to sort of highlight this, the fact that we can make change mindfully, because it kind of flies in the face of some misconceptions that some people have of mindfulness, and that is mindfulness is simply sitting back on our cushion and accepting the world as it is and not working to make a change. But Erica and I hope to persuade you today that it takes mindfulness. It takes that mindful awareness first to begin to make a change. So this tree, we actually ordered a print of this, and it sits on our campus. And if you go to the website for the Association for Contemplative Mind in Higher Education, you can actually download a very high quality PDF. It's free for any purpose, and I keep mine nearby so I can refer to it. So we just are making the point that the contemplative experiences are broad and diverse and go beyond even what is listed on this tree. So if all of this is mindfulness too, what is mindfulness? We want to sort of define that for you to give you a context. If we translate the word directly, it simply means awareness. And I come back to that again and again and again because I try to remind myself that mindfulness is not the same thing as meditation. John Kabat-Zinn offered sort of a more specific definition for those of us in contemporary Western society, and that's the second bullet point on your slide here. John Kabat-Zinn's definition has 3 components to it. The first component is that mindfulness, when practiced correctly, is deliberate. If you don't focus your awareness in a deliberate manner, you're basically running on autopilot, which is what most of us do most of the time during the day. The second prong of the definition is that as much as possible, we try to suspend evaluation in order to see things objectively as they are. And the third prong of the definition is that mindfulness is rooted in the thoughts and events of the present moment, a place that we do not spend a lot of time. Let's just be honest. We like to stay rooted in the past. We like to project in the future. I love my to-do lists, but the true practice of mindfulness is being right here, right now, as objectively as possible. I make a distinction between the practice of meditation, which is one way of practicing mindfulness, and mindfulness writ large. You should know, though, that if you explore any of the research literature, those terms are used interchangeably, and scholars are not consistent in making that distinction. I think it's very important to make that distinction, to separate the fact that meditation is only one path to mindfulness. The best image I could find to sort of represent this definition is right here. I love this little image. I found it online. Of course, it's an oversimplification, but the guy is sitting outside and thinking of all the other things except for where he is right now. And the dog, I don't know if we can say the dog is happy or that caption came with the picture, but definitely the image of the dog in the thought bubble is a great example of what mindfulness is. But just as important as exploring what mindfulness is sort of rooting ourselves in knowing what mindfulness is not. So we've prepared a slide for you of what mindfulness isn't. Because I have worked with a lot of students with the different mindfulness practice, and for students and faculty and colleagues who do not practice mindfulness, the first excuse they give, not that they need to give me an excuse, but the first thing they say is, well, I tried it, but I just can't quiet my mind, or I can't empty my mind, or I can't stop my thoughts. And that reveals a misunderstanding of what mindfulness is, because we can't calm the mind or stop the thoughts. It's simply observing what is. So that's kind of a misconception that is very prevalent in our culture right now. The second bullet point, I hope I've made the point that mindfulness and meditation are not the same thing. I like to emphasize this because my life happens when my eyes are open and I'm doing things with people. I don't have time often to stop and sit down and close my eyes and meditate. And when I do have time, that's wonderful. But we can do anything mindfully if we focus our attention deliberately in the present moment. The third bullet point, relaxation and stress release can be one benefit of mindfulness, but it is not the same thing. If I'm angry, then I can be mindfully, I can sit in that anger. That doesn't mean I feel relaxed or anything. It means that I am present with my experience. The fourth bullet point I referred to earlier, that mindfulness can be thought of as acquiescence. Well, I'm just going to practice radical acceptance and let everything in and not fight to make a change. I engaged recently in a hopefully positive banter on a discussion board with a very prominent sport psychologist who said, I know a lot of psychologists are using mindfulness, but I do not use mindfulness with my athletes because I don't want them to be happy where they are. I want to push them to be the best that they can be. And so I wrote back respectfully and said, may I offer you another perspective of mindfulness, that it's not sitting where you are and not being the best you can be. Anyway, I could go on about that, but I won't. Okay, so the next little bullet point that I want to make the case of is that we're not talking about a practice aligned with a specific faith tradition. I think this misconception is sort of fading away, but I can tell you that in the 80s and 90s, if I brought up the word mindfulness, a lot of times the assumption was that I was teaching Buddhism. And that's because the practice that John Kabat-Zinn started in the 70s was originally rooted in Buddhism. But if mindfulness is paying attention, then anyone can practice mindfulness. So we can have a secular practice that's very inclusive, but you must also realize that if you plan to use mindfulness with other people, there are people who do not feel comfortable practicing mindfulness unless it is affiliated in their specific faith tradition. And there's nothing wrong with that. Every major faith tradition has a contemplative component to it. So, for example, at the University of St. Thomas, we offer secular mindfulness practice, similar to what I led you through earlier, sort of just secular meditation, paying attention, but we also offer Christian contemplative prayer. The thing to remember about mindfulness is that it's like water. It fills the size and shape of whatever receptacle you want to pour it into. Last few misconceptions: mindfulness is not a panacea or a quick fix, despite what you will see in all of the big name newspapers and magazines that you leaf through as you're in the checkout line, who talk about, mindfulness will fix this problem and your anger problem and your health problems. And it's not a means to an end. It's just the end. The practice is the practice in and of itself. There was a session yesterday that I'm so sorry I wasn't able to see about spiritual bypassing, which is the idea that we use a philosophy or a practice to go around difficult or unresolved emotions rather than dealing with them. So spiritual bypassing would be, I'm very angry at someone who's done something, and I'm going to immediately push that aside and practice forgiveness or practice acceptance, when actually what I need to do is sit in that anger and just bubble and boil in it for a while mindfully. So we're not talking about going around difficult emotions. We're talking about going through them so that we can take action from a more objective place. And the last misconception is that it's easy to say, but it is very difficult to bring the attention back again and again and again to the present moment. So after I did a sort of a little lecture with a group of honors students, one of my students sent me this image. Oh, I have to see, I keep having to move my little face around so I can see the caption at the bottom, which is a little play on words though. This is basically the same image I showed you earlier, but I do like the little play on words. We're not trying to empty the mind, but we're trying to focus our thoughts on the thoughts and events of the present moment.
Thanks, Vanessa. I have that poster on my door, actually, of my office. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our One University, One Breath initiative. And in the handouts, you'll find lots more detail on how we did this. But here's sort of an overview. In the fall of 2017, we decided to have a pilot that was sponsored by our wellness center, and it lasted for 1 month, mid-October to mid-November. And what we had people do quite simply was they signed up, and if they signed up, they received 2 things: a wristband. There's an image of our wristband which says, breathe in, breathe out, 1 university, 1 breath. And a number of people said the wristband was helpful in reminding them to take a breath. And then they got emails twice a week with, again, reminders just to breathe, quotes, images, encouragement. We had about 312 participants, and they were pretty evenly spread among students, faculty, and staff. And there were also a few community members who signed up as well, from people telling their friends, I think. Yeah, we tried to have an event launching it, and then another event where we kind of concluded the pilot, and we had some news stories as well, which are linked in the handouts. Also, we had surveys. Go ahead. Yeah. We asked people when they signed up, what are your typical coping strategies when you experience stress or anxiety? Now I have to move this. Well, I have it here. About 29% said they used breathing. This was, at the start, and 17% walking. And then it went sort of down the line through, you can see exercising, meditation, yoga, prayer. So breathing was the most common that was used. But then we asked them to fill out a similar survey afterward. There we go. And you can see how breathing really shot up. It became 81% of the people said that they used that as a coping strategy to deal with stress. And after that, stopping to focus, which was interesting because that wasn't even mentioned in the earlier survey. And now 43% of the people said stopping to focus. So fewer people answered the survey the second time than the first, full disclosure. But we feel that this showed how 1 university, 1 breath had an impact. But even more important were the qualitative responses that people offered. So here's a response from a student saying that, after participating and taking 1 conscious breath a day, I feel like it has not only helped me deal with stress, but it has also improved other aspects of my life. For example, I feel like when I take a conscious breath, it does not only help me to relax, but it also helps me to feel more focused on what I'm doing after. And this is something a lot of my students have certainly pointed out to me, because we always start class with a minute of mindful breathing or some sort of contemplative practice. And they always come back to the focus, how it helps them to focus. We have some more. Here's a comment from a staff member, and a lot of staff members have signed on to 1 university, 1 breath. The stop and take a breath technique proved to be very effective for me. I think we're so used to just pushing forward, isn't that true? So used to pushing forward no matter how we're feeling, that to do something as simple as to stop and take a breath really brings you into the moment, and best of all, can refocus your energy. And then we have a comment from a faculty member. This faculty member, it seems like, was pretty experienced in mindfulness already, but it says specifically with first-term freshman advisees who would come to the office stressed about registration grades, he or she would do 1 breath with them, and if they were open to it, also show them other breathing exercises to manage anxiety. And finally, another comment from a staff member. During high periods, high stress periods, the thought would just pop into my head to take a deep breath and focus on the present. That was a direct result of the emails from 1 university, 1 breath. Thank you. I would love to continue this initiative. And we have.
So the idea is that if we start small, I mean, if Eckhart Tolle says one conscious breath in and out is a meditation, then we can use that to begin to develop other programs on our campus. We had a number of programs that students have been very involved in, also our colleague, faculty, and staff. We've had mindfulness open houses. Now those are offered via Zoom. You can drop in and practice mindfulness. We've had labyrinths on campus where students can walk through the labyrinths. We've had student led meditations by student meditation trainers. This is a photo of a meditation sit-in that we sponsored a couple years ago. This is our colleague Bill sort of in the foreground. On the back of the t-shirt says Project for Mindfulness and Contemplation. That's our project. And on the front of the t-shirt, it says Meditation in Progress. And you can actually see that behind Erica. She's got her t-shirt hanging on her wall. It's wonderful though, when I wear my t-shirt, even if I'm in the grocery store or whatever, people often ask me about it. What do you mean meditation in progress? And I can say, well, I can do anything mindfully. So that's a lot of fun. So we like to talk about how this tiny little seed practice can be a creative way to make a change. And basically the idea is that we're starting with such low-hanging fruit. Everyone, people will tell me they don't have time to meditate, but they have time to stop, look around them, stop the narrative that's in their mind, stop the story, stop the planning, feel the physical body, take a breath, look at the person they're talking to, and that single moment can be the beginning of more ambitious projects. So we start small and then we work larger so that we can make this practice widespread across the university and then eventually beyond the university.
Yeah, and this slide shows how, you know, this is just a foundation for, as Vanessa just said, for a larger dreams. So phase one is this going broad across campus, trying to just get as many people as possible aware of the initiative and committing to taking just this one conscious breath a day. And I say just, but it is not a just. It takes me, I sometimes have to remember, oh, wait a minute, have I breathed at all today? Have I been in the present moment at all today? So as Vanessa said, it is not easy, even this seemingly minimal thing of taking one breath. And then we see phase two, and these all overlap, and I think we're in all the phases right now, actually. But phase two is where various groups on campus commit to specific contemplative practices and sharing with the larger community. And Vanessa already mentioned a few of those. I'll add, for example, my English department, Vanessa's music department, our faculty senate, all have committed to beginning with mindfulness at the start of meetings, and this seems to be spreading somewhat. And so our hope is that eventually other groups on campus, sports teams, for example, I know are already doing mindfulness, will just make a commitment to this. And then what we're also hoping for is to bring contemplative studies as part of our curriculum, to have maybe a minor or a certificate or some such thing. We're working on that. And also building expertise among faculty, staff, and students. And Vanessa is contributing to that next week by providing a Train the Trainer event on Zoom for how to lead meditations. So we're trying to sort of just build up expertise and confidence. For me, it was largely a matter of confidence to go with that expertise. And then eventually to spread to other organizations beyond St. Thomas, which we're doing now, I guess.
As we began to reach out across the campus community and into the larger community, and as we began to write grants to get some of the things we needed, such as meditation props and cushions and music and programs and apps and things like that, t-shirts, right? We found that we really needed to craft a mission statement for our project, and this has been very helpful, and we would encourage listeners out there who are interested in starting something in their organization or institution to what we did was we looked at the mission of our university, and we looked at the mission of the Association for Contemplative Practices in Higher Education, and we crafted this mission statement that basically focuses on the idea of developing and sustaining a culture of contemplative practice. In other words, okay, maybe right now this is sort of a peripheral thing that I have to sort of stop and remember to do. That's the first step. But eventually, if enough people do it, I mean, if everyone in the world were to stop and take one conscious breath every day, we talk about how would the world be different, or how would our awareness be different? Would we see each other more clearly? Would we recognize our own biases? We could go on and on about that. So the whole purpose, as you can read here in our mission statement, is to develop these basic practices that lead to, for example, social innovation, transformative educational experiences, change making, certainly, but they all work together to build a culture of contemplative practice, so that as we go forward to make changes, we start from a place of objective awareness. So this was very helpful for us. And as our university continues to grow and expand, they just developed and built a new center for well-being. And our project now is sort of part of many other offices on campus, but I'm going to show you a picture of our new space for students and staff and faculty to meditate. This is a little mind-body space in the Center for Well-Being. There are little devices hooked up where you can listen to meditation podcasts. There are different kind of size of benches and cushions. There are chairs if you just want to sit and talk. And so it's nice to have a space. It doesn't take much, but really it is nice to sort of have a quiet, sort of special place to develop those programs. So we mentioned that we were going to do two meditations with you. Here is the second one. And this second 5-minute meditation is a little different because this is a meditation about awareness of thought, which is a little trickier to do. So we're kind of moving up the challenge ladder here. So once again, if you'd like to turn off your video camera, you're welcome to, but you certainly don't need to. I am going to ring this bell when we're done. So here's the sound of the bell again. And once again, I invite you to settle into a comfortable position. Always honor the body. So if you need to move or stretch or scratch your nose or whatever, I think it's important that when we meditate, we not try to sit rigidly and unnaturally. Honor the body and move if you need to. Find a nice, comfortable position. You may close your eyes if that is comfortable for you. If that's not comfortable, you can direct the gaze downwards at a specific spot and sort of focus on that spot. And if you'd like, you can gently begin to focus your attention once more on the breath. And just as a reminder, there's no need to control the breath because we're simply observing the natural inhale, the natural exhale, whatever that happens to be for your body. And this time, we're going to practice noticing the thoughts, keeping in mind some of the attitudes of mindful awareness: acceptance, non-judgment, patience, non-striving, letting go. And as you continue to listen to my voice, you may notice that this guided meditation is only one small part of your mind's awareness. This is the part of you that is listening to my words. But allow yourself to notice the other subtle channels of awareness that are active in your mind right now. For example, One of those streams of consciousness might be your own inner commentary. This is the small inner voice that evaluates all of your thoughts and experiences. Or perhaps there are memories or new ideas or random thoughts popping up in your mind. All of these are completely natural. This is how the human mind works. See if you can take a moment to allow these thoughts in without judgment. See if you can begin to observe your thoughts in a friendly and detached manner, almost as if you were watching yourself thinking. As each thought drifts into your awareness, see if you can acknowledge it with friendliness. Let it in, accept it, and then gently let it go. Set it aside. You can always give yourself permission to think about it later. You may notice that other thoughts quickly bubble up. You can let these in as well. And then gently set them aside. Always returning your awareness to this present moment. Remember that you can be aware of a thought without the judgment or emotions that sometimes accompany it. You can be aware of a thought without thinking a thought. And I invite you to sort of come back from that activity. That's something I use a lot with my music students who sometimes struggle with performance anxiety. Well, actually, we all struggle with anxiety. But the idea of setting the thoughts aside, I sometimes will visualize that I'm setting them right outside the door, and I give myself permission to pick them up later. It's my Scarlett O'Hara strategy of I'll think about it tomorrow. Okay, I'm worried about this thing I have to do, but I'm going to think about that later. So that awareness of thought can be very helpful. At least it's been helpful for me. So we mentioned towards the beginning of this presentation, I showed you sort of the top of the tree of contemplative practices, and we kind of want to wrap up by tying mindfulness in with change making. And this slide right here could be 6 more conference presentations and breakout groups and wonderful discussions to have. And I hope these are discussions that you will continue to have with your communities. But the idea here is that we can be mindful activists because if we engage from a place of objective, non-judgmental awareness, that gives us space to deal with some difficult emotions and ideas. For example, it allows us to identify our own privilege in a space of non-judgment. Here's who I am. It is what it is. Let's start there before we move forward to make a change. It can help us identify implicit bias. It can help us look at the mistakes our society has made in the past and do that with objective awareness so that we can move forward with perhaps less outright anger and emotional baggage. We can set that aside and just work objectively for the common good. We can release unhealthy narratives that are in our individual minds and also in our societal brain, if that makes sense. We can engage in thoughtful activism. So these are just some of the ideas you can begin to play with. If we start with mindfulness, where could that eventually lead us?
And now to conclude, I invite you all to practice taking one conscious breath one more time. I invite you to inhale deeply, exhale completely, to simply be right here, right now. There's our contact information. And now we'd like to open it up to questions and discussion. I think we have a good 10 minutes left, so we're eager to talk with you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. First, I would just like to offer some sincere gratitude. I think I really loved that session and learned so much about it, and specifically really loved that tree. I think there's so much that I can take from that. And the thought that keeps sort of rumbling around in my brain, which I think is so beautiful, is the concept of this one breath, sort of coinciding with this idea of self-forgiveness. Because every time I try and share my meditation practice, specifically with my students, they're like, it's just so overwhelming. Like it seems like so much more than it is. So this concept of, hey, you know what? It's just one simple breath really gives that self-permission and self-forgiveness to say, hey, you can do this. We can compound from there. And I guess my question, like, have you noticed anything around that piece? I guess specifically around the buy-in for the students or participants, staff, faculty, whoever you're participating with, and how, like, do you have any of those really simple resources that you can share so that potentially I could also incorporate it into my practice in my classroom?
And I'm sure Erica has things to share too, because she does this a lot in her classrooms. But I thank you for your comment and your question. And in my experience with my students, the great benefit of the stopping to take one mindful breath is the stopping piece of it, because you could breathe, you could eat a raisin, you could do anything, but if you stop, whatever it is you're doing, you're stopping the narrative, you're stopping the anxiety, you're stopping all of the stuff that's up here. So students could breathe or they could be doing anything else. I would like to add something to the one conscious breath practice, and that is for people who are truly in a state of distress, it's not always as effective. If I'm having a panic attack and my teacher says, just take one conscious breath, let's all take a breath. Okay, sometimes you need a little bit more. So what I like to do sometimes is use the breath for a container to hold one thought. And this can be really effective depending on what kind of people you're working with. So for example, on the inhale, students can think to themselves, I am. And on the exhale, they can think whatever you would like to put in that container. I am safe. Or you mentioned compassion, which is wonderful. They could think, I am okay, or I am just fine, or I am, Erica just a moment ago said, right here, right now. Oh, gosh, I love that one. So that's what I would offer, well, as a resource, of course, but also as an additional thing to try depending on your context.
Yeah. No, I would say I think of one breath as definitely the entryway drug. Gateway, what do they call it?
Gateway drug, Erica.
Because as you say, anyone can do that. And even as easy as that sounds, we've been working on this for years now, Vanessa and I, just to get people at the start of meetings or at the start of classes to just say those words. Let's all take a breath. And we're trying to get those words out there, because even just saying those words and everyone doing it together, it's happened, right? It's happened right there. We have handouts available that give Laura more detail on how to lead meditations. We have one of those. We have one on contemplative pedagogy, and we have one on how we just launched this whole initiative in more detail than we've given here.
And I'll just add, because of a lovely comment that just popped up in the chat box about how this is helpful during the pandemic, I would agree completely. And if we're going to interrupt the narrative, if that's what we're doing with One Conscious Breath, during a pandemic, when we're sheltering in place, where the news just gets worse every day and it's very hard to turn off those sort of streams of information, I find it's very helpful to just stop looking at my gadget or reading the news and just look out the window and take that one conscious breath. It doesn't get rid of the fear or the overwhelmment, if that's a word, but I continue to interrupt that narrative to remind myself that right now I'm okay. In my mind, all these horrible things are happening and the curve is not flattening enough and all of these things. But if I look out at my window and I take a breath and I look at myself, I think, but you know what, right now I'm okay. And this can really help students too, to remember that they're in the present moment. Normally, I'm going to say 98% of the time, in the present moment, we're okay. We might not be okay tomorrow, but we're not talking about tomorrow. We're talking about today. So I appreciate that comment and just wanted to tie that into the pandemic that we're all dealing with right now.
Hey everybody. Yes, I have a little baby here. She says hi, a little Aviva. She's 3 months old. And actually for the second meditation session I was nursing, so it's a little harder.
Well, that's a wonderful way to meditate, I think. My best meditative moments came while nursing.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. But thank you so much. This was so helpful. I work with a leadership organization, and we've tried a lot to incorporate a lot of kind of mindfulness and meditation, but I've personally never been great at it, even though I really need it. So thank you. I think, making it, something simple like one breath and focusing on that breath is essential, even for, I'm just so much going on with the kids and work and being home. But I had 2 quick questions for you guys. In your experience, because we try to do this a lot with our students who come in our programs. And a lot of times we get that pushback. These students are like, oh, this is so like hippie and I don't want to do this. I'm sure you've gotten that, and like, oh, this is so like, crunchy. Why would I do this? So I'm wondering, one, how you've dealt with that with your students, or how you've like talked around it. Like, I was just thinking maybe I could show them like cool people who meditate, like athletes or something. But like how to make it to them seem like it's not just like some hippie earth thing that they don't want to get involved with. And then 2, I loved what you were saying about using this to identify privilege and bias, but I just wondered if you could talk more about that, because I think that's so important to the work we do, and we don't talk about it enough. Like when you're in social change and you're working with communities that don't look like you, that you're not from, it is so important to identify your privilege and the power dynamics and the biases you have. And I find it really hard with students sometimes. So.
Erica, how about if I take the first question and
Yes.
you take the second, since you've practiced that privilege mindfulness. The first question about how do you get around the hippy dippy, which is getting a little better, I have to say, because Erica and I have noticed, at least in our area in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, that when we come up across resistance in 2020, it's usually our colleagues who are middle-aged and older. They're still grounded in that hippie, pot smoking, love, whatever. What's interesting with our students, especially with Generation Z, of course, is that many of them have been doing this already in their schools. So a lot of times, especially with my first year students, when I say, okay, we're going to take a moment, that's nothing to them. Oh, we've done this before, or we've done this. Our coach does this with our football team or whatever. But more specifically, to answer your question, I think language plays a really important part for me. And I think, unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm going to say unfortunately, the word mindfulness is now so loaded, along with words like wellness, that mindfulness sort of has a new agey connotation for better or worse. So sometimes all you need to do is find a synonym. Um, the words that Erica and I use a lot, one is pay attention and one is be aware. So rather than, okay, folks, we're going to meditate, what we could say is, hey, let's just take 1 minute to notice how you're feeling. Or I want you to have a conversation with the person sitting next to you and just be aware of their body language as they're talking. So sometimes if you take out the word meditation, if you take out the word mindfulness, and Erica used the term gateway drug, kind of get them into realizing, okay, this is just noticing. There's an activity that works really well for children, which means it works well for college undergrads, right? And that's where you, in a classroom, have everybody get up and walk slowly around and say out loud, right now I notice, and then you fill in the blank. So you've got 20 students all talking at the same time to themselves, and they're saying things like, right now I notice that the carpet has a stain on it. Right now I notice that I feel weird walking around talking to myself. Right now I notice that this windowsill needs dusted. And that is a mindfulness practice, but it's also kind of an activity. So I would say explore different ways of using language and introducing practices maybe before meditation sort of enters into the practice.
Yeah, I agree very strongly that the language has a lot to do with it. And I come from this, I didn't tell this part, but that I was very much a skeptic coming into this. Vanessa and one of our colleagues offered a faculty development, 4-day workshop, and it's not something I would have signed up for. I thought of mindfulness as that woo-woo stuff out there, whatever people call it. And then I finally just signed up for it because I was tired of giving workshops. I direct writing across the curriculum here, and I just wanted to sit and take one. I didn't care what it was. And so the language that Vanessa and the others used, which seemed normal to me, it didn't seem like this very rarefied language that was off-putting. It just seemed real to me. And that has stuck with me ever since, that when I'm doing this with my students, which in the beginning, you're very nervous to do, but then you just use language that makes sense to you, like paying attention, then it feels more organic and natural to do. You asked about the exercises, or I have an exercise that brings together privilege and mindfulness. And I've done this twice now, and each time it was after we've had a racist event on campus, unfortunately. And what I do, and I learned this from the Contemplative Mind in Higher Education seminar I went to, have the students pair up and then time them. And for, I think it was 90 seconds, one speaks to the other, and all that they're doing is naming their privileges. I'm white, I am middle class, I am, and then it takes a while. You have to really dig down, and you're discovering privileges that you had not even thought about before because you can't stop talking. So naming all these privileges for 90 seconds. And then there's a 1-minute pause, just silence, breathing. And then the other person does the same thing for 90 seconds, the privileges. And then another pause. And then they each just say back, thank you. And here's what stood out to me from what you said. And they each take a turn with that. And it both times it was a very powerful exercise, I think, for the students, because they had to go beyond even the obvious privileges that they know that they have, to really digging deep and noticing other ones as well.
And if I could just sort of follow up with something, Christina, you said, and it was just sort of an offhand comment, but it was so important because we hear it a lot. And you said something about mindfulness, and I'm not very good at it, but nevertheless, blah, blah, blah. And we get that a lot. And I just want to, the hardest lesson to learn, and Erica and I have not learned it yet, but we're students and we're trying, and that is you can't do it wrong. There's no such thing as a bad mindfulness practice, because remember, one of the attitudes is non-striving. So the purpose is not to do it right, the purpose is to do it. And it took me many years to realize that when I'm meditating and my mind is going a million miles an hour, and I suddenly realize that I haven't been paying attention and I've been daydreaming, and I used to get so mad at myself, and now I'm recognizing that that moment of awareness, oh man, I was totally somewhere else. I don't even remember how I got to my exit on the highway. That moment is the victory, if we want to ascribe a judgment to it. So if you're paying attention, no matter what the mind is doing, you're doing it right because you're doing it. So I think that's something it's easy to say, it's hard to do, but we can sort of communicate that to the people we're working with.
Yeah, I repeat that every time I do this with students or even faculty. You cannot do this wrong. And that was very liberating for me personally, too. Are we out of time? I'm just noticing. It's after.
Are we supposed to wrap up, or can we keep going?
Where are we, Laura?
Wesley, where are we?
For 2 minutes. You can keep going a couple of minutes if anyone wants to stay on the call.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other questions for us?
I just wanted to say thank you. I really enjoyed this session. I think it was probably my favorite of the conference so far.
Oh, thank you, Michael.
That's awesome. We would love to stay in touch. Our slides and our handouts are on the SharePoint folder, and we have our contact information. So Michael, please stay in touch with us, or anybody. If you're doing something on campus, we really are working hard to build a community of people who are like-minded in this way, because it's only going to make us stronger and give us more ideas. So thank you for your feedback.
Sure. I think that this whole approach could really inform our change-making effort at Miami-Dade College. I think this is like the missing piece of the puzzle for us.
Thank you.
That will be exciting to follow.
Yeah.
It'll be exciting to follow up with you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, Erica, are we done?
I guess so.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, sure,
because I'm really enjoying this. Sorry, this
Absolutely.
is really top of mind for me, and I've been really wanting to learn more about mindfulness and meditation. But you also said using mindfulness and meditation for building confidence and kind of awareness. And I just did a whole workshop on the confidence gap and helping women with building confidence. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that. And I also noticed, I think, Erica, you mentioned you didn't have the confidence to do something. I can't remember what it was, but I noted it down in my book. So I just think it's so important. And one thing I'm really trying to help the women in our program and my women's staff is building their confidence. So I would love to learn more about that.
Well, I was referring to the confidence to lead meditation and to lead any of this, because I feel like I was such a baby coming in this, and that it took just experiencing things like Vanessa's faculty learning community and going to the summer session that the Association for Contemplative Practices in Higher Ed offers. So feeling like it took me maybe 7 years before I could verbally lead a meditation. 7 years. For five of, for up to that point, it was like, well, let's all take a breath. That was it. So one of my goals is to help others, faculty, students, staff, to maybe to shorten the timeline a little bit there, and to feel confident earlier that you can do this. You can actually practice one breath and being aware in the present moment, and you can help others to do so, and it's not really that hard. The other thing that I stress is that I see it as a lifestyle, really, being consciously aware, being present, just not that you're always that all day, because as Vanessa pointed out, mostly we're not, but just having that pattern of pausing and paying attention, right? It's not even about the big breath or anything, but pausing and paying attention and getting into the habit. It's really a habit of doing that. And so I think of that as more of a way of being in the world. That's how I introduce it to my students. This is how a way of being in the world. It's not this big practice, this thing that seems unattainable. That you can just be in the world, make this how you are in the world by practicing pausing.
And if we're looking at the attitudes of mindfulness, the two that really lead, I think, maybe to confidence, if we want to think about it that way, is acceptance. Tara Brach called it radical acceptance, and that's a book I definitely recommend if you're interested in reading up on the idea of radical acceptance, but also self-compassion, that we are okay. We don't have to be anything more than we are right now. Again, easy to say, hard to sort of internalize, but the more, as Erica said, the more it becomes sort of just a way of being, the more we can sort of live out those attitudes. So,
Do you know if there's a question here. Uh, Other institutions who have piloted similar mindfulness initiatives on campus. Mm-hmm.
not
Want to talk
one
about that, Vanessa?
university, one breath. So this initiative is unique to our campus. We hope you all, maybe would like to start that.
Yeah.
But Erica, on one of our handouts, do we have some
Yep.
of those institutions? Brown University, yes.
Yeah.
There are a few that have worked really hard in other areas in contemplative practices, and those are on one of those handouts. Yeah. Oh, thanks for your question, though.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thank
Thanks for
you.
joining us, and I
It's
hope you
really good to meet
enjoy
you all.
the rest of the conference.
Yes. Enjoy
Thank
and
you
feel free
very
to
much.
follow up with us.
Yeah, definitely. Bye.
Bye bye.
Yeah.